Hidden Gems, episode 28. Ships and Stuff. Welcome to Hidden Gems, a board game podcast where we review unusual, forgotten, and underappreciated board games. We're your hosts. My name is Chris.
I'm Jason.
And this is Bill.
Welcome to the show.
I was wondering who's going to do it
We
this
always
time.
look at each other after that when Cameron's not here. Like, who's going to do it?
We never do it as good. No Cameron today. We got Mr. Bill back with us. Welcome back once again, Bill.
Good to be back. Thank you for the welcome.
Good to have you, Bill.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got an exciting episode, entering a new era for Hidden Gems. Episode 28, year 2. Hopefully we get off to a good start. Maybe a little bit less of salty start to this year.
Hey, you're the salty one.
That's true.
Although, if we're trying to not be salty, we picked a bad theme.
I was getting ready to say salty theme and salty players. Let's put it that way. We'll see who's salty this time.
I was going to say that listening to the last episode, one, I want to compliment you on the montages. That was so cool to listen to. I will point out that my only cameo part of that was the calling out of being the most evil game player. And I'm kind of okay with that. But I was really also glad that I was not reviewing Phoenicia.
Oh, boy.
Because that was awesome.
You know, it's funny. I've gotten a lot of chatter from people saying how they really enjoyed listening to that episode. I think it just makes for good listening. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes people like to hear people argue when they know that they're doing it in fun, which obviously we are. But yeah, you know, we yelled at each other a couple times.
Happy to argue with you anytime, Chris.
Good to know you guys are passionate.
I think Ghidorah actually in the geek list, when he did the write-up on Phoenicia, he said something like, "And are mom and dad fighting?"
That's awesome.
But yeah, it was a fun episode. Really enjoyed doing that. And we just want to take a quick minute to thank all our listeners. We've sold quite a few shirts in the last...
it's blown up lately.
Yeah, a couple weeks.
Guess all we have to do is sell them for wholesale.
Yep, 50% off. People jumped on them, but we're honestly glad that people are repping the shirt, repping the podcast. It means a lot that
Absolutely.
you would spend some money to wear something with our name on it. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah, get the name out there.
Yeah, for sure. We've also picked up some patrons. We've mentioned a couple of our Patreon supporters before, but I think starting with this episode, we're going to try to be more committed about at least once mentioning everybody by name and just saying an official thank you to everybody who is supporting the podcast. So just very briefly, we have 6 people we want to mention here by name. Jeffrey Frost, Gabe Schwartz, Barry Young, a good friend of mine who lives in Colorado, QS888, which I'm not sure if that's on his... QQS888, which that's probably not on his or her birth certificate, but that's all we got. So QQS88, if you'd like to let us know who you are and your first and last name, we would love to share it on the air. Jonas Thorson, he's been with us for a long time in the guild as well, an awesome supporter, and then our friend Nick Spicer as well.
Yeah, glad to have all of you.
Yeah, awesome. All right, Jason, what's new, man? What have you been up to?
Yeah, so I feel like it's noteworthy enough that I should mention that I played a game that was ranked less than 1,000 recently.
Top 100, actually.
I know.
Are you allowed to be at the table when you do that?
I know, it's such unfamiliar territory. But
we went together.
We did. We went away for a friend's birthday recently, and I played Isle of Cats.
Yes.
Which is a bizarre game.
It really
but
is.
I really enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. Such a good puzzle, like Feast of Odin with the placement of the tiles. Enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I did too. Just general thoughts. What do you think about it?
Yeah, so I really enjoyed the drafting element of it. It had a Terraforming Mars type feel to it. And then I love anything that's a spatial puzzle. You have to draft cards in this game, and there's synergy between the different cards that the end game point scoring cards, and they drastically change what your objective is in placing the cats on your boat. I thought that was really clever and creative.
You've only played it once. What is your gut feeling for a Hidden Gem score for this game? What would you think?
Ooh, man. Yeah, that is pressure. After one play,
sure.
I would give it a 4.
Okay.
I think it could be a 5 with more play, but
I'm
not going to go all in on a first play.
Sure. Yeah, I'm very similar. I'm kind of on that 4 or 5 line. I enjoyed it a lot as well, much more than I thought I would, even though I don't particularly love drafting games. But this one, I thought it did it really well. I guess if I had any hesitation about it, it would be the thing you mentioned about those in-game scoring cards and the fact that they are drafted. It does seem like that if somebody gets a really killer synergy combination of gold cards, either they drew them or somebody didn't draft them out and let them have an awesome synergy, that it really doesn't matter what happens in the rest of the game. They're just going to win because they got really awesome gold cards. But Again, I'm hesitant to be too critical of it on a one play, but I enjoyed it. Like I said, I'm in the 4 or 5 territory as well.
Yeah, I think some of that synergy, I probably passed on tons of cards that I didn't even know had synergy with other cards that were in the deck because we just hadn't played it before.
Right.
But yeah, good game.
Agree. Entertaining.
Outside of that, I have a show update.
Yeah.
I know, Chris, you haven't watched this one yet, but
Not yet.
I keyed you into it.
Convince me.
A while back. This is brand new, hot off the press. Only 3 episodes out so far, so take it with a grain of salt. But I've enjoyed what is out so far. I've been watching Severance. So this is a new Apple TV show. Has Adam Scott, so any Parks and Rec fans out there.
Cones of Dunshire.
Yeah, Cones of Dunshire, Ben from Parks and Rec. It has a little bit of humor, but it's dark humor. So the premise of the show is that there is this medical procedure that's possible where they inject a chip into your brain and it separates your work memory from your personal memory. And it's spatially aware. So when you enter a particular location in the company, they have a floor of the building that is the severed floor. And when you enter that floor, you immediately forget everything about your personal life. You know nothing about your personal life. And then when you go up the elevator and you leave, you know nothing about your work life.
Weird. Okay, I'm digging that.
Yeah,
and so
crazy.
There's some potentially shady stuff going on in the work world. I won't spoil anything.
Sure, right.
So it kind of launches into this investigation thriller type thing of like what is actually happening. And yeah, I'm intrigued.
I like it.
Like I said, there's only 4 episodes out, I guess, now. But I've liked what I've seen so far.
Awesome.
I have to say, I'm getting really frustrated with how many good things are coming out in Apple TV because on the 17 other things that I have, I just don't happen to have Apple TV with Netflix and Amazon and
all the other subscriptions.
Right.
HBO Max. I'm still working my way through Raised by Wolves Season 2.
Yeah, that whole cable cutting strategy.
Might be more expensive.
Yeah, it isn't working out so well anymore now that I have
exactly.
14 streaming channels. So what's been up with you, Bill?
Yeah. Hit us, Bill. Hit us with some deep theology.
It's coming, Chris. Well, I'm going to start with this weekend. In COVID, we have been housebound for so long, and we took off to Blowing Rock this weekend.
Oh, yeah.
And it was absolutely
Beautiful.
awesome.
Tiny little mountain town in the mountains of North Carolina for those who are not aware, but yeah, quaint little place.
Went out and did some hiking. Went to Glen Burnie Trails, which is right out of.
Oh yeah.
Have you done it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So you'll appreciate how steep that is. And did you go all the way down to the bottom falls?
It's been a long time.
Ago.
Yeah.
At the top of the trail, like the first 0.6 miles is kind of easy, and then they call the rest of it strenuous. I think they need another word other than just strenuous because it gets really crazy because it is very steep, lots of roots, rocks are all kind of tilted in different directions. And I will say this is one of the first times that I have realized that I'm getting old because my balance was so messed up, which makes me think of Chris. I'm getting old.
Hit me with it, Bill. I'm ready. I knew this was coming.
Yes, it is coming.
I can take it.
It is. So Chris has a big birthday coming up.
No.
Today.
Yes, today.
Birthdays.
Chris has turned 40.
Yes, March the 6th.
So I'm going to break it to you here. You're headed on your downhill side of life.
Yep.
You've been in your acquisition phase of life from 20 to 40.
Yes.
Life is like a blank canvas, right? You add more to it, you paint to it, and you get more. Well, now, Chris, I hate to break it to you. You're transitioning to where life is more like a sculpture.
No.
Right?
Hey, I started actually selling some of my board games in the last year or so. Jason knows that I used to not sell anything, but
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I'm running out of space.
you're a pack rat.
I was going to say, man, you took my whole punchline. So I'm sitting here, really, this room is a real mecca for board gamers because it is just an absolute crazy collection. But I was going to say, man, as you get older, it's going to feel like those chains on Bob Marley's neck. And some of those iffy fours, you're going to say, I will never play that again.
That's
kind of
true.
thing.
That thought has actually crossed my mind. I won't lie, but
Yeah.
I'm hanging on to them for now. Deep thoughts
There
from
we
Bill,
go.
as
Sorry.
usual. Bill, if you haven't figured it out, folks, Bill is a very deep thinker. He's a thoughtful
The philosopher
gentleman.
of the group.
He is. He's a thoughtful gentleman.
There is a ramping mechanism there with alcohol. So that's a tendency to come out in podcasts. So.
I know. I started to say I came back with our cocktail and you were drinking a Red Oak, and then I looked down and you have a Yingling, and I was like, "What the heck,
Okay,
Bill?"
that's right. I was going to say, I need a little prime. Well, Chris, what's been up with you?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I turned 40 today. So had a lot of birthday stuff happen in the last couple days with my wife Talia and my kids, which I really enjoyed. But there's one thing that I just have to talk about. I won't say it's the highlight in case my wife listens to this because I want her to know that going out with her was the highlight. But My oldest son and I, Bryce, went to watch The Batman on Thursday night.
I was going to say, I'm surprised Tally didn't go with you.
She did not, because she does not care a thing about The Batman, and she was happy for Bryce to go. But we were pumped. I think I've alluded to it on here before. Obviously, I'm a big comics fan. I think everybody knows that. But my favorite by far is Bruce Wayne. Batman. Just always has been, ever since I was a kid. Fascinated with the character. Just something interesting about somebody going toe-to-toe with superheroes that doesn't have superpowers, I think, is what's so interesting about him to me. Not to mention, he's kind of an anti-hero in a lot of ways. His dark side, the demons he wrestles with, just a fascinating character. So suffice it to say, my expectations for this movie were super high. I was prepared to be disappointed, because whenever you're really invested in the source material...
Even with Robert Pattinson?
Right, exactly. I haven't watched Twilight. I'll never watch Twilight. Although, he has done some pretty interesting stuff. Have you ever seen The Lighthouse?
No, but that's on theme for this episode, and I've been intrigued.
Yes. Okay, so he's actually not a bad actor, I will say. And I'll talk a little bit more about him in this role in a minute, but I was skeptical. But anyway, I'm just going to really quickly do a little mini review of The Batman, because I can't help myself. Just have to give my quick little pros and cons on it.
Do you have a list?
Is there any spoilers in this? Do I need to
No spoilers.
Okay.
No spoilers.
Good.
Maybe one very small spoiler, but not really.
Is there a list, though?
There's a list of pros and cons.
Oh, God.
All right, so real briefly, probably my favorite thing about the movie is it very closely follows the comic book source material. This is number one, the thing that annoys me the most is when they deviate from the comics too much. And they nailed this one. I am sure that whoever directed this read modern age Batman year 1, year 2, year 3 stuff, including The Long Halloween, if you're familiar with that graphic novel. Had to have, because it's referenced directly multiple times. And it was really, really well done. There are a couple of themes about Batman talking about how he uses fear. The whole reason he dons the cape and cowl isn't for a costume, it's to strike fear into the hearts of criminals. That's a really big theme in the movie. They do that really well. He has a really bad relationship with police officers, which if you're familiar with Batman Year 2 and Year 3, that is a theme throughout those stories, particularly a storyline known as Prey, which I really enjoy. Second thing I really liked about it is, in this particular movie, the mobsters and the gangsters felt like mobsters and gangsters. You know, in a lot of comic book movies, they can almost seem like bumbling oafs, caricatures. They don't really seem threatening. They just seem more goofy. Mm-hmm. This is not a kid's movie, okay? Now, my oldest son's 15. Not a young kid's movie.
More threatening than Heath Ledger's Joker?
Well, that's different. He's more anarchist. They're like gangsters. I mean, there's
like Goodfellas.
Yeah.
Baseball bats.
Exactly. They feel threatening. There's a lot of drug use in the movie. It's more adult. So if you're worried about it being comic booky, it's not. And I consider that to be a pro. Number 3, thank goodness it's not an origin story. Thomas and Martha Wayne do not get killed in this movie like they do in every other Batman movie ever. That's good. It just gets right into it. And then the fourth thing, which is probably my favorite thing, is they're really focusing on Batman as a detective more than a superhero. There is fighting, there is action, but it's more about him figuring out what's going on and really showcasing him as a detective, which he's the world's greatest detective. So I really like that part of it.
Who is the primary villain? Or
Riddler.
Is that a spoiler?
The Riddler.
Okay.
That is not a spoiler. Riddler, I thought was good also, but it's an interesting take on the Riddler. He's a serial killer, basically. Like I said, it's a more mature show for sure.
So there's no Bams or Biff stars?
No,
or
no Adam West.
Okay.
Batman.
Okay.
All right, so 2 things I didn't like, because it's not a perfect movie. It was a good one, a great one, really, but it's not perfect. I didn't like Robert Pattinson's portrayal of Bruce Wayne. He's very emo-ish, which just wasn't great for me. Bruce Wayne, in my opinion, should be doofy, spoiled playboy kind of attitude to disperse suspicion away from him being Batman, right? And in this particular movie, I think everybody would figure out Bruce Wayne as Batman because he just doesn't act any different. I didn't like how they did that.
Yeah.
And then the only other thing I would say, it's very dark and edgy, which I normally don't mind, but there was a lot of whispering and everything was very slow and deliberate and maybe a little overdone. But all that being said, I liked it a lot. I would give it a 5 out of 6 on our scale. Thought it was excellent. One of the better ones I've seen. Not my favorite Batman movie, that's Under the Red Hood, but I really did like it. I think if you like Joker, Joaquin Phoenix Joker, you would like this. If you didn't like Joker, you probably wouldn't like this. If you're going to watch a Rock'em Sock'em special effects action movie, this is not what you're looking for. But
I was kind of ambivalent on the Joker. It was okay, but a little
dark.
Well, I don't mind dark. It just felt a little heavy-handed on the darkness, I guess.
This is the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. I could see how some people wouldn't like it, but like Joker was a character study on the Joker, this is a character study on Batman in a lot of ways. It's good, though. Liked it.
Cool.
All right. Well, as usual, we always say this. We have a cocktail.
This is your job.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I picked this cocktail out especially for Jason.
Oh, awesome.
So this cocktail is called the Salty Dog.
Is it just straight grapefruit juice? That's what it tastes like.
No, it's got gin in there. I probably went a little heavier on the grapefruit juice than I should have, but it's 1.5 ounces of gin or vodka, either one, whichever you prefer, and 3 ounces of grapefruit juice, salt the rim of a highball glass, and just stir. One of the easiest cocktails you'll ever do. And like I said,
So no sugar.
no sugar.
Huh.
Just grapefruit juice and gin or vodka. Salty Dog.
Yeah, this is awesome. Last time I had this, I was in the Caribbean. That was the drink of choice 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
You'll be saying that soon.
It's a pretty, it's a pretty well-known cocktail, and I just had to use it because Jason got a little salty in some of these games. So I'm looking forward to talking about that,
I never do that.
like I did last episode.
There might be some salt coming this episode.
So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about shipping games tonight. I don't have a whole lot of clever, witty banter to say about shipping games. If you've been in the board game hobby for any amount of time, you know about shipping games. You know it's a very popular used theme. And I think the reason for that is shipping, by its very nature, is very logistical.
Yep.
And it's very procedural, right? Which makes great material for a game, not to mention the whole pick up and deliver aspect as well is just fertile soil for board game mechanisms. But I don't know, what do you guys think about shipping games in general? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I feel like the shipping theme or the 1800s New World exploration theme gets blasted all the time as being like, wow, I can't stand another game that has this theme. And
Trading in the Mediterranean.
yeah, I totally understand that. There are an enormous number of games that have the exact same theme, but it doesn't bother me that much.
Yeah.
If the game is well designed, it doesn't bother me, right? We will see if these games are well designed or not. But
It is funny because looking at these games, it is shipping with something else in it. Like one of them here is a recipe fulfillment, right? But you're kind of shipping into the recipe fulfillment, and the other two don't have that component, or it's a very weak part of that component.
Yeah.
I kind of like it. It's one of those that you can have a very clear purpose, and sometimes some games you don't have the roadmap in front of you that you know exactly what you're doing kind of thing. So
I think that's a really good point too, because people at least generally understand how shipping works. They tend to be a little more intuitive of a theme. So I agree there, and I agree with Jason too. The shipping theme doesn't bother me. I think we've made it pretty clear. I think we're all very similar on this. Mechanisms first, theme second. For me, at least.
yeah.
If the theme is good, that's just bonus. I really don't care. I really care about the mechanisms. And for me, shipping themes are kind of like train games. I can play a lot of shipping games. I enjoy them, generally. I think they're pretty fun.
Shouldn't be a surprise from a group that did a whole episode on cube rails.
That's right. All right. Well, if we don't have any other thoughts about shipping games, I say we just jump on into these reviews. What do y'all say?
Let's do it.
let's go.
All right.
During the Edo period, Higaki Kaisen were trading ships, transported materials to Edo, now Tokyo, the center of political power in Japan. There, Fudasashi, or brokers, would await the shipment of various specialty goods from Osaka, the mercantile center of Japan. As traders, you will be responsible for the safe transport of the valuable goods that will let Japan prosper into the powerful nation it is today. Your ships will depart from Osaka and journey through dangerous waters on their way to Edo. If your ship is caught in the black tide, you stand to lose precious cargo. A clever trader will invest in insurance to mitigate the possibility of such losses. For each successful delivery to Edo, you will be paid kindly. Who among you will profit most from this tireless work?
All right. Traders of Osaka, published in 2006 by Z-Man Games. At the time of this recording, its BGG ranking is 1,323. Designer of this game is Susumu Kawasaki. This designer is also credited with one other notable design, which might be on the podcast at some point, a game called R Echo.
Oh, I've heard of this.
Yeah, that one I would say is probably more well-known than this game by people who've been in the hobby for a while. So where do we hear about this one? I've had this game for a long time, actually, and have been excited about getting it on the podcast. But I will also mention that we had a guild member recommend that us take a look at this one as well. We mentioned this guy a few times. He gave us a lot of recommendations on the guild, and that's a good way to get mentioned on the podcast. So he just had a lot of overlap, and that would be Emperor Penguin also recommended this game as well. So we'll be doing this review for him. All right, brief rule summary for Traders of Osaka. In Traders of Osaka, the players will be acquiring merchandise from a card market to sell for victory points in Edo. However, players must be careful that they don't lose their newly acquired good cards in the violent waves that the shipping boats will face on the way there. The game consists of a deck of cards made up of 4 different colors or types of goods, with each card having a coin value of 2, 3, or 5, and an insurance value of 1 or 2. In addition to the cards, there is also a small sideboard showing a map of Japan with 6 different locations that the shipping boats will travel upon. There are 4 different colored boats in the game, and each boat corresponds with one of the 4 colors of goods present in the game. All of the ships start in Osaka, and as merchandise is bought, the ships will move forward towards the final destination of Edo, where they will ultimately score points. On a player's turn, they can do one of 3 things. First, they can purchase all of the cards available in the card market. The players will use cards that they have in their hand with their accompanying values, again, cards can be worth 2, 3, or 5, to purchase all of the cards from the market, which will then go face up in front of the player as merchandise. So again, I just want to make sure there's a distinction between cards in your hand, which are purchasing power, and these are all the same cards. When they're in your hand, they're money. When they're face up on the table, if you've bought them from the market, they're merchandise. 2 different things. Whatever color of cards are bought in the market row will cause the corresponding color of boat to begin to move along the shipping track. If 1 card of a color is bought, the corresponding boat will move forward 1 space. However, if 2 or more cards of a color are bought, that corresponding color of boat will move forward 2 spaces. Cards from the farm, which is another row of face-up cards above the market, will then come down and create the new market, along with 2 cards drawn off the top of the deck. Now, the significance of the boats cannot be overstated. Once a color of boat lands in Edo, all players who have that color of merchandise face up in front of them will score those cards. They take the value of the highest card in their set, multiply that by the number of cards in their set, and then round up to the nearest 5. Players will get 1 victory point for every 5 points calculated in this way. It's important to note, and this is probably the most important thing to understand about this game, that the 2 shipping spaces immediately prior to Edo are black tide spaces. What this means is that when 1 or more boats land in Edo to score, any boats sitting on one of those 2 black tide spaces get destroyed, and everyone holding merchandise of that color must discard it from in front of them. However, if you're holding cards of that color in your hand that have an insurance value associated with them, you can spend those cards from your hand at that time to prevent that merchandise from being destroyed. Alright, so the final 2 actions are pretty straightforward. Second action is very simple. Instead of purchasing the entire market row, you can pull a card out of the market row and add it to your hand to increase your buying power for future turns, thereby decreasing the cost to purchase the market for the rest of the players. And then the third and final action is the reservation action. All players have 1 wood token that they can place on any card in the face-up farm or market. When placed, the card is reserved for that player, and he or she is the only person that can purchase it. I neglected to mention that when people sell sets of merchandise, they collect a small token of that color that they can use to add to the value of sets of that color in the future. The game ends once 1 player has collected 8 of these tokens as well, and at that point, the player with the most points wins the game. And that's generally how you play Traders of Osaka. For a game that's pretty small...
yeah, I don't know. That was a pretty long explanation.
Well, Jason... You know, for it to be clear for the people, it kind of had to be, and it was still pretty brief, I would say. But it's pretty involved for such a small little card game.
It is. It's funny because really it's fairly simple, but it comes across as really complicated. Because when you're looking at it, it's simple to understand what's happening in front of you.
Yeah, when you play the first few hands, it's very opaque. You're like, what am I even trying to do here? It's bizarre. But anyways, let's get into an intro question, kind of in a similar vein. I think for me, the combination of the card play, with the cards in your hands, buying cards from the market, combined with the shipping track, and controlling how those boats moved on the shipping track when you buy cards from the market row, for me at least, was very unique. I thought that was a very unusual mechanism that I really hadn't seen before. So I would ask you guys, Did you feel similarly? You ever seen anything like that? And how did you feel about the mechanism in general? Did it work? What were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I'd say for me, I think it definitely was unique, like you said. I've not seen anything like that. It took me a while to wrap my head around it. You mentioned this in the rules explanation, how the cards are both the currency that you're buying things with as well as the things that you're buying.
Right. Multi-use cards in a way.
And figuring out how to wrap my brain around, okay, well, I want those cards, but I also have to take some of those cards in order to have money to buy those cards. But if I buy those cards, then the boats are going to move, and then the cards that I'm getting are on the boat that's going to sink. So now what? Like you said, Bill, for as simple as it is, it takes a little while to grok, like, what am I actually trying to do, and how do I pull the right lever so that I don't screw myself over?
Yes, which you can easily do in this game.
Yeah.
I think you just said the dilemma there beautifully. The decision point of those cards and how many things happen once you get it. I need to lay cards in front of me or I'll never make points. But I might be moving a ship that I don't want to move, or I don't want to be moving my ship because you might be putting it in the danger zone and somebody else might be in striking distance to go out and score points and sink your boat. It's just a fascinating game mechanic I've never seen either. So it's very cool.
It is. Yeah, I think this game has a really interesting and beautiful timing aspect to it, because you can't just indiscriminately buy cards in this game. While you could do that, it's very dangerous, right? Because like Bill said, you always have to be eyeing those black tide spaces. If I buy these cards, which boats are going to move? And then when you buy cards, you usually spend most of your money.
And now you're highly at risk.
You're at the mercy of everybody else at the table because you need money to be able to make the boats move, because the only way to make the boats move is to buy merchandise, but you just bought merchandise, right?
Yep.
So it's dangerous in that way. So in some ways, the game could be seen as a little bit chaotic, and I guess in a sense it kind of is, but I also thought it was interesting. I found the more that I played it, I really became intrigued with this idea of controlling the market. Some really interesting, clever little things that you can do is, let's say I've got a lot of yellow cards and everybody's eyeing my yellow cards, my yellow merchandise. Like, man, Chris will score a lot of points if yellow comes in. Let's try to sink yellow, right? Which is a strategy in this game. And maybe I don't have a lot of cards to purchase to protect myself. Well, if yellow is in the market and I don't want to move into that danger zone, if I pull that yellow card out as money, yellow's not going to move, right?
Right.
Or I can throw my reservation token on it. And now nobody can buy it but me, so nobody can buy that yellow card to make yellow move into the danger zone. And so I felt there were some pretty interesting little subtle ways to where you can control a little bit that offensive nature to the game of people trying to crash people in the waves, which I think is a fun strategic part of the game as well.
The close cousin to that is looking at people who have points to score with their ships out in the danger zone that could score if you leave those cards out there. And so taking those cards so they can't move in, and then trusting your neighbor to take those cards. So part of that is blocking people to move so that other cards come out that maybe you can get somebody else in there first.
That's a really good point too. Forcing somebody to sit on black tide.
Exactly.
By not letting them move into Edo is also another really interesting strategy by pulling those cards out of there to try to sink them later.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that happened a lot.
It did happen a lot.
Yeah, I will say, and this is probably my biggest con with the game, is that while I agree with all of those points, that there definitely is the ability to control the market, I think at times I felt like even though I was trying to do that, there are just situations that you're going to be forced into based on the way the cards come out.
Sure.
Where you can't avoid it, right? In your situation, when 3 or 4 yellow cards come out, sure, I can buy one of them, or I can pull one of them out, or I can put my reserve token on one of them. But there's a good chance that by the time in a 4-player game, at least, it gets back around to me, the market has shrunk to the point where somebody has bought those cards. Mm-hmm. And yellow's moving forward regardless of what I do, right?
Sure.
And I found those situations happening more often than I felt comfortable, perhaps.
What did you think about having the farming track that was visible to you that was going to pull down as a gaming mechanism? Did you like that as a...
I think it's essential.
Yeah,
right?
me too.
You would have...
Be too chaotic.
You'd have absolutely no control if that wasn't there, right? And if anything, I wish that track was larger.
5 cards instead of 3.
So that you can see further into the future, right? I do like that you can reserve cards from that row.
Yes.
Right? You can put your token on a card that hasn't even come into play yet. I think that's a clever addition, right? That gives you a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more choice on your turn.
Yeah, I agree. One other thing I wanted to mention real quick, too, before we transition to cons, because I know we got to go there, but really briefly, I think we would be remiss if we didn't at least mention the insurance. Again, a pretty clever mechanism here. This can seem like a mean game, and it can be mean at times, and it can feel chaotic at times. But again, the game gives you material to safeguard yourself, right? Taking these cards to where if your boats do crash on the rocks and the black tide, well, if you've got those insurance cards in your hand, you can save some of those cards, right? Which is a good thing. It'll cost you the card, but at least you don't lose the merchandise. And I think what's so cool about it is the cards that are the strongest from an insurance perspective, the 2s, are the weakest from the purchasing power aspect in the game, because everybody loves them 5s, right? When those 5s comes out, people just start salivating over those 5s, right? Because you want that buying power. But the 2s can save your rear end in a bad moment. Your ship gets crashed on the waves or whatnot. I don't know, I thought that was another really neat little aspect to the game that I enjoyed.
Yeah, it's such a push-pull, because with the insurance, the color has to match, right? And so it's like, well, I need insurance. But if I pull that card, then that's one less card when I go and actually try to buy this color of cards. That's one less card that I'm actually able to buy. At least with the currency, if I take a 5, I can take a 5 of a different color, a color I'm not going for right now, right? With the insurance, it feels painful. It's like one step forward, 2 steps back almost. I need insurance so that I don't lose these cards, but if I take the insurance, then I'm eliminating all the cards that I actually want to pull in order to either make the boat move forward or have more of those cards to score them.
Right.
Yeah, that's funny you say. I do think it's a cool mechanic, but I've always felt it was happenstance when I had it in my hand, because I would never choose a 2 off there because I wanted that person.
I chose 2s often for insurance, but I think
interesting.
I don't think either is wrong. I just think it's interesting. We were thinking about the game a little differently,
right?
And you won the game at least once, maybe twice, I think. So it was working out for you. But there were several times we tied with a split win. So
yeah, I think I tied for first both games.
Right. So I think both of those strategies are valid. I think our brains were just working a little differently.
I never won this one, so take my opinion with a grain of salt.
Well, having said that, do you have any cons, Jason, that you want to voice?
I think I mentioned mine, right? The lack of control was the biggest one for me.
Right.
And I say that cautiously because, like you've mentioned, the game gives you the ability to control things. I think that even beyond those mechanisms, though, you will find yourself in situations where it feels like the game is kind of beating you up a little bit. It's like pushing you into a corner of, well, you can try to control this as much as you want, but you're still going to get screwed here. And I found that happening more than I wanted it to. And that was probably poor planning on my part, right? I probably could have gone for insurance. I don't think I focused on that heavily in the games that I played. So, like I said, I list that con cautiously.
Sure.
I don't think I have many cons. I mean, I really liked it.
I don't either. My only con was, I agree with Jason to a point. I think there are uncommon situations where a deal of cards can come out in the farm that just can really bury you, potentially, or can really benefit somebody. If somebody has a handful of money and 4 yellows come up in the market and yellows within striking range of veto, that person's just going to score a lot of points. And that was luck of the draw, but that's a lot of games, right? For me, with the insurance and with the reservation marker and with being able to pull cards out of the market row, this game gives you ample tools to be able to protect yourself most of the time, if you use them. But again, using those tools can set you back a little bit in some ways, but are you willing to take the risk, right? Do you take this crappy 2 and take the insurance, or do you take the 5 and risk it? Right. That's a decision you just have to make, right? Do that calculus, and I think that's fun for me.
Cool. So I want to move on to final thoughts?
Yeah, let's do it.
Why don't you kick us off, Bill?
Okay. Well, to go to my analogy, I think we've got some games here that are painting a work of art and adding more and more and more to it. This one, I think, is the sculpture.
Yeah.
I think somebody looked at this, they pared it away until they found something beautiful with it. I think it is a work of art, in my opinion, on how elegant all these rules tie together. Even with the design choice of the 2, 3, and 5, it's not 1, 2, and 4, right? When you think about the ratios of those numbers, they thought through it. So I could just imagine the designer having more in this game and saying, this isn't working. Let me pare it back. There's only 2 dangerous spots in this game, too. The 2 spots right before, and then they designed it so that you only have 1 turn to get through. So anyway, I just thought it was absolutely great. I'm giving it a 5. I'm like on a high side 5.
Wow.
So
yeah, nice.
One of the words that stuck out to me when you were speaking, Bill, was elegance, right? I think this game has a very elegant system to it. It's a very beautiful game, the way that it looks.
It does look really nice.
And I think it has a very streamlined system. and one that is pretty unique. I think that it should be explored by more people. I'm glad that you rated it a 5, Bill, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Chris. That said, I think for me and my personal enjoyment of this game, I settled on a 3. And I say that hesitantly, right? Because everything that I said right before I said 3 is true. I think this game is elegant. I think it's a good design. I think it's a good game. I think it's a good game that's maybe not for me.
Yeah. It can really rip your heart out sometimes, this game.
Yeah. and so, like I said, it almost pains me to give it a 3, right, in a sense. But I have to be true to, like, am I excited to play this game again? And for me personally, I'm not really. And so as much as I can appreciate the game and as much as I think the game is elegant and I'm glad that you guys enjoy it, for me personally, it's a 3.
Nice. All right, so Bill and I were talking the other night about this game, actually, I think after we played it or before, and we were talking specifically about uniqueness. I don't know if you remember this conversation or not, Bill, but he was looking at the wall of games or whatever, and he was just like, I just find it so fascinating that you can still be playing games after all these years, and you can find games that you still feel like are unique, or I think what you said was games that you had never seen something like this before.
Yeah. I don't know how many times in this podcast people say, I've never seen a mechanism like this before. And it's just so cool that there's creative people out there. Yeah, it's just awesome.
Because a lot of times you do, right? Oftentimes we'll play a game and we'll be like, oh yeah, this game is like Feast for Odin, or oh yeah, this game is like Blood Rage or something. There's no game like this that I know of. This game is totally unique. Totally. This very clever card play of trying to get merchandise you want, which isn't necessarily unique. Buying cards from a row, buying merchandise. But what you buy, moving these boats into advantageous and or dangerous locations where you can lose your scoring potential is so freaking cool. I just love that. And it's unique. I really enjoyed that part of the game. One thing I didn't mention in cons that I just forgot to mention, this is a real minor thing. I wish maybe the game was a little shorter. I expected this game to be a little shorter than it was.
It is a little long.
It is. For as simple as it is, this footprint on this game is tiny, is super small. But you can lock up in this game a little bit because of its opaqueness, I think, at least in your first few plays. Just trying to wrap your head around how the boats are moving when you buy cards does make the game maybe a little longer than I would like. But despite that, I really enjoyed it. I'm going to give it a 4. I think it's a really good game. I'm very happy that I own it. I'd gladly play it. And I think most people in our game group like this game pretty uniformly. Everybody except for Jason.
Right. Salty Jason, as I'll be referred to from now on.
Salty!
You got to have somebody to give you counterpoint.
That's right.
All right, where can we find Traders of Osaka, Chris?
Yeah, so good news on this one. There are copies available at Noble Knight, our sponsor, Noble Knight Games. You can purchase it there. If you do, we would appreciate it if you use our coupon code HIDDEN22. If you use that, you'll get 10% off your order. There are also 27 copies on the BGG Marketplace as well. So for a game that came out in 2007, pretty available still. And 2 out of 3 of us recommend it.
Hey, I recommended it to people other than myself. So
I'm teasing you. I thought your final thoughts were very well done.
Thanks.
But yeah, pretty easy to get. All right. Well, those are our thoughts on Traders of Osaka. Before the Wind. A fleet of commerce ships lies aside the quays, waiting to be loaded with valuable goods. An assortment of goods will fill the captain's bill as his crew readies the ship for sea. You are a prominent merchant, trying to fill your warehouse with the goods these captains need to fill their holds. A ship captain will only accept goods from one merchant, so quickly collecting the right combination of goods is the key to victory. Fill your warehouse with care, and spend your guilders with prudence. Tarry not, and let not a moment pass before you load your goods, for the fleet will leave the harbor with the wind of the winds. If you wait too long, your precious goods may spoil before you fill a captain's hold. Can you keep the merchant empire running before the wind, or will the winds of fortune blow ill?
Tarry not.
Tarry not. No, Cameron would have just killed that probably, but
yeah,
that was fun to read.
He would have done it better than you did.
He would, for sure.
That's funny.
Don't be salty.
All right. Before the Wind, published in 2007 again.
How about that?
I know, right? By Mayfair Games and Phalanx Games. Designed by Torsten Landsvot.
Yep.
Hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Gnomes of Zavendor.
Ah. Yeah. Currently ranked on BGG 2,471. So Before the Wind is a card-based trading game where players are attempting to acquire goods in order to store them in their personal warehouse in order to eventually fill ships with these goods in order to score victory points. The game is played until a player reaches a predetermined number of points based on player count. These points are scored by fulfilling the requirements of various ship cards that are available at any given time. And these ships require that players provide between 1 and 4 goods of specific types. To do this, each round, one player will be responsible for choosing a number of action cards equal to the number of players, and they choose each of these from one of 3 stacks of action cards that are themed by their use, I guess is the best way to say it. This player is not allowed to take more than 2 cards from the same stack. The themes of each of these stacks are as follows. So the first stack has cards that help in acquiring goods cards and moving them into your hand. The second stack has actions which allow you to move goods cards from your hand into your warehouse. And the third stack contains cards that allow you to move goods from your warehouse onto the waiting ships or to take income. Once the action cards have been placed out onto the board, then comes a somewhat tricky trading phase. So I'll try to detail this as best I can without going into too many specifics, but each player will first have the opportunity to choose a card from those available, but it does not necessarily mean that they will get to keep that card, because each player, when they choose a card, can either choose from the cards that are available, or they can choose a card that another player has already chosen. If this happens, they must also make an offer of any amount of money, or guilders, for that card. Then any other player that has not currently been locked out of the round may also make an offer of any amount for the card. This is not an auction. The bids don't have to be higher than the previous bid. You can make an offer of any amount you want. Once this is done, the player currently holding that card must choose one of the available bids or offers. If they want to keep the card that they have, they're going to have to pay one of those offer amounts to a player who made an offer. If they don't want to keep the card, or they can't afford to pay one of the offers, they must give the card to one of the players who made an offer, and that player will pay them their offer amount. Then the player who received the money in the deal and the player who received the action card in the deal are both then locked out for the rest of the round and can no longer participate. So this will continue on until every player either has an action card or has money in front of them. Once that happens, each player who has an action card will then take the action on that card, and then the process begins again. So the only other detail to iron out here is that at the end of any turn where there are 2 or less ship cards left, the whole fleet sets sail, and every player has to resolve the spoilage of their goods.
Ouch.
So any goods cards that are in your hand, meaning they haven't been placed into the warehouse, immediately spoil
Gonzo.
and are discarded. Goods that are in your warehouse spoil at different rates. So there are 4 goods: apples, spices,
Cheese.
Thank you.
Cloth.
And cloth. Apples spoil completely. Can't keep apples around. Cloth never spoils because it's cloth. The other 2 goods, spices and cheese, both spoil at the same rate, which is a 50% rate. So you add the number of those cards you have together, divide by 2, round down. And that's pretty much it. Again, like I said, the game ends once a player reaches a predetermined number of points. All of those points, again, come from those shipping cards that are basically recipe fulfillment. And the main mechanism centers around that trading phase and the shenanigans that can happen there. So that is essentially how you play Before the Wind. So, like I mentioned, that trading phase of these cards is pretty unique, I think.
Yeah.
I at least haven't seen that done in a game before. It kind of feels like an auction, but it's really not.
It does in a lot of ways.
Because you're just making an offer, and you don't even have to accept the highest offer.
And that's why it's not an auction, right? Because the high bidder, quote unquote, doesn't necessarily get the card.
Exactly.
Right? The lower offerer can get the benefit, which we'll elaborate on more.
But at the same time, it's unique because it's a forced mechanic, right? If
Yes.
somebody selects your card, you have to either pay them to keep it or accept their offer.
Yeah,
right?
and take their money.
So what did you guys think about that being the central mechanic of this game?
Yeah, I love this part of the game very much. Like Jason said, it's not really an auction. It's more price setting. But I really enjoyed it in this game because figuring out the valuations were tricky, and it had a Medici feel to it to me. Again, it's not an auction like Medici because it's not necessarily the high bidder, but it forces you to pinpoint in on that value because you only get one shot at it, right? It doesn't go around and around. You get one offer. You got to hope it's the right one.
If you make the wrong offer, you're going to end up with money, which maybe is what you want.
Maybe it was what you want.
But it's maybe not. And you either get money or you get an action.
Right.
So...
And that's another thing I really like about this bidding, selecting of cards, is nobody's going to get left out. You're always going to get something. You're either going to get a card or you're going to get money. So you're always getting something positive. But there may be something that you wanted more. You may have really wanted the card and you got money instead. So you're thinking, maybe I should have said I'd give them a little bit more, right? So you're constantly wrestling with those valuations, trying to get them right. And another thing I really liked about it is you can really take advantage of people if you know they're short on money.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because you don't know for sure what people are holding financially, but if you have a sense of somebody who's been spending a lot of money and they're not holding many cards in your hand, you're like, I bet I can get this card for a little bit cheaper than he would like me to, but I just know he's hamstrung right now, right? So I think there's some opportunities to gouge people too, which I always love in these kind of games.
And I know I missed that opportunity with you one time. I offered 8 and I could have offered you like 3.
What were your thoughts, Bill?
Yeah, what do you think, Bill?
I like the econ. It reminded me of Ponzi. I guess it has a similar mechanism where that you're forced into the trade if somebody makes
clandestine trading. Yeah.
Exactly. That something's going to happen if somebody makes an offer.
That I keep and I pay, or I give and you pay.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I like the fact that somebody else can do it as well, and they can make a lower offer. Let's say somebody offers you something higher, but you really want to keep that card, and somebody can lowball it and say, I'll give you 2, and you have 2 offers on that same piece because the other person might want the money, right? And they just need it a little bit more, and you get to keep the card. This is an interesting dynamic. The other thing I like about it is it takes a little bit of the randomness of the card flips out of it, because sometimes you really need a card, right? And it may not have come up the last turn, but you need it this turn. And it gives you the opportunity to have a decision point to say, I'm willing to spend this much for it, right? And it kind of flattens out the randomness of the flips.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the card flips, because this is one thing I really wanted to mention about this game from a pro standpoint, is the person who's the active player or who's in first position, they get to decide what cards come up for auction. So as Jason mentioned in the rules, there are 3 different piles of cards that do 3 very different things that are all very critical in the stepwise progression of buying goods, getting them in your warehouse, and then getting them onto ships, right? So when you're in first position, you control those cards that come out, and you're not obligated to draw a card from every pile, right? So obviously you're going to draw from the pile that benefits you, but let's say that I know Bill really wants to ship, but I'm not ready to ship, and I don't want Bill to ship. I'm not drawing a shipping card. Right?
Or maybe you do draw a shipping card and then gouge him for it.
Yeah, and then let it pay me for it, right? You can do that as well. So many clever strategies. Another thing that I picked up on is, let's say there's a type of card that I know I really need, and I don't want people to fight me for it and try to steal it from me. Maybe I flip that card and then I flip other cards that I know other people want and give them what they want, so that I know I'm going to get what I want, so people don't mess with me, right?
Exactly.
This card flipping of deciding what comes up for auction is so much better than a game like Phoenicia.
We're going back there again.
Where in Phoenicia, you're just drawing 5 random cards off the top, and it could be a horrible flip, and you could be screwed totally, right? Here you have a little bit control over what comes up for bid, which I really enjoyed personally.
Yeah. One other little nuance to that I found to be super clever was the third pile of cards is the shipping cards, but they're shipping plus income, and it's an either-or thing. So you either ship stuff, meaning you fulfill cards to get points, or you take a pretty significant amount of income, and this is one of the primary ways that you get money in this game.
Yes.
And combining those on the same card, I thought was super clever, because usually if you're in need of money, you're going to go to those income cards. But by pulling those income cards out and making them available, you're also making available the actions that everyone else needs to go score a ton of points.
And maybe end the round.
Right. And maybe end the round and then screw you over on all your apples. Right.
Right.
I thought that was pretty clever.
Yeah, and I'm glad you segued into that, and I'll kick this over to you guys and see what you thought. How did you feel about that timing element of the boats, and how each round it was kind of like a clock? You start with a certain number of boats, and once they whittle down to 2, the round ends, and your stuff spoils. All that work you did, you can lose stuff that you've built up if you're not ahead of that game, and you're the one that's ending the round. How did y'all feel about that in this game?
So there's several steps to getting things to the ships, right? There's the acquisition of the cards that go to your hands, and then you have to pay to put it into your storage, and then you have to pay to get it to shipping. And each one of those costs money. Money is super, super tight in this game. But people who are able to put things in their storage to fulfill 2 ships, it's kind of a gambling thing, right? Because once it leaves you don't know if somebody else is going to get the ships or not. You kind of have visibility that you can. But in general, I don't know, to me that was one of my goals, was to have enough stuff in my storage so that when I got that shipping card, I could fulfill 2. I was never able to achieve it. Then I was always marveled at other people who had ever figured out how to do it. But I've actually forgotten your question. What was your...
Just that timing of the boats.
Oh, yeah, the timing of the boats. It was a push your luck kind of thing, right? Do I just take that extra turn to get the shipping, to get the boat I know I'm going to get, or am I going to risk trying to get my stuff into storage so I could possibly get 2 boats out the door at the same time? I thought that was interesting, stressful. I wasn't good at it, but I can see that's a strategy to win the game, I guess.
It's push your luck a little bit, but at the same time, you also have information, right? You can see what other people have in their warehouses.
Yes.
You can see what they're going for, and you can start to play with the timing a little bit in your head of like, okay, well, I can see Chris is probably going to grab that card. I think Bill's probably going to grab those 2 cards over there, so that leaves 4 left. Do I have enough time to grab this? I'm going to get a couple turns where I can maybe not draw any shipping cards and prevent that from even being an option, so can I delay a little bit? I will say this type of mechanism where things can end at any point and you might get screwed over tend to make me not like a particular game, right?
I like stuff like that.
But in this game, it didn't bother me, and I think it's because of that information, right?
Yeah.
You have the information in
feels
front of
fair.
you. And it is possible, sure, that somebody could jump forward faster than you're ready. But it's a lot of steps, right?
Yeah.
You have to get the cards. Then you have to get the cards into your warehouse. Then you have to get the right action cards. There's a lot of steps involved. And so somebody can't just come out of nowhere and just
Unless they play special cards.
There are some special cards.
Those
right?
can jumpstart your engine.
Yeah, we haven't really gotten into the special cards, I guess, and talked about them. But I think that's an important point to note.
Yes.
Right.
I agree with everything else said. I just want to reiterate. I feel like in the early to middle rounds is where the decisions really get hard. Because early in the round, you're just taking goods willy-nilly. And then you start to think, if I keep taking these goods, am I just wasting actions, right? Because you start to do that calculus in your head of, can I get these down and get them ships without them spoiling? And so it really creates a nice tension in this game because these boats can go out quick. And another thing that I think is really clever is there are small boats and big boats. Big boats are worth way more points than small boats. However, I've seen people, I've done it myself, just grab a bunch of small boats and just end the round real quick, not getting myself as many points, but I just knew I screwed a bunch of people over and spoiled a bunch of their stuff, right? So it kind of puts everybody on edge about how many goods cards did I take, what actions did I do, because the thread of the round ending is always there, and I like that tension in this game.
Well, what about cons? Anything you guys didn't like?
Yeah, I think one thing that I'll mention, and this is probably a con for all, was if I had to guess. We'll see. But at times, the game can maybe feel like a bit of a slog because of this multi-step process of cards to hand, to warehouse, to ship. It doesn't sound like it would be too bad, but you would be surprised. Because the goods that come out, it might be 3 of the 4 goods you need, but now you don't have that 4th apple to make that boat, and the apples aren't coming out. And then when the storehouses are coming out, they're all expensive. And then somebody keeps taking your shipping card and you can't get the shipping card. And it just feels like sometimes you're going through molasses or honey, you know? You're just like, I just want to ship these freaking goods, you know? And it's hard sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. I think it didn't bother me too much, but I could see it maybe driving some people absolutely insane, honestly. I'd be interested to know what y'all thought about that.
Yeah, I can see that. It didn't bother me that much either, but I can see that being a concern.
Yeah, I will say it did bother me. I mean, it's funny. I was going to describe it as a depth of complexity because we have a game that we're going to talk about that has a breadth of complexity, I think. But this one, for you to accomplish the goals of the game, you have to follow this line, and there's a lot of complexity at each step, and there's a lot of variables around it. So, yeah, sometimes it did feel like it was slow and painful, and especially when you're seeing other people move faster. It's like, how did you do that?
Right.
You know?
Some rounds I felt like I was getting them out pretty quick, and there was one round, the whole round, I couldn't ship anything. I was like, why can't I freaking ship these goods? It just, you feel jammed up sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ready for final thoughts?
Let's do it.
Chris, why don't you start?
I can do it. All right. So no build up for me this time. I'm going to go ahead and just score it right away and then explain myself. So I'm going to give this game a 4. I enjoyed this game a lot. I think it's a good game. I'm cautiously giving this game a 4. Now, I'm cautiously giving it a 4, not for myself. It's solidly 4 in my book. I could actually see this game going up for me the more I play it. I'm cautiously giving it a 4 because I could see how a lot of people would not like this game. One of the reasons we already mentioned, just how tough it feels to move through this progression at times. And one other thing that I didn't mention for time that I knew I would mention now, which is another small con. Again, not for me. This is not a con for me. But I could see how it would be for others, is this game can be repetitive. You're basically doing the same thing over and over and over and over again the whole game. You're putting 3 or 4 cards out for bid. You bid on the cards. You do what the cards say. Next player. Put out the cards. Bid. Do what they say. Next player. Repeat, 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 repeat. If you don't like auctions or price setting, this game will make you nuts, I think. You just won't like this because it's repetitive in that way. For me personally, I loved that ever-evolving and changing puzzle at every round, figuring out the valuations afresh. Based on the game state and what's happened and what people are trying to do and how valuable a card is to me this time, I'm constantly reevaluating. How much money am I holding, right? I enjoy that puzzle. So for me, this game is a very good game. I liked it a lot. I think a lot of people may not like it, so I would say, can't really say try before you buy because these games are really hard to find, but I would say just be cautious. If you're not in love with auction games and you don't like that mechanism, you're probably not going to like this one. If you like price setting in auctions, this game is definitely worth a try. Okay? So for me, I'm going to give it a 4.
It's funny that you mentioned the repetitiveness because I think all 3 of the games that we're reviewing tonight have that exact same thing. I would
That's shipping.
I would say the exact same thing about Traders of Osaka. You grab a card from the market, or you buy all the cards in the market so that you can move ships forward.
But it's much shorter,
you do it
right?
over and over.
Traders of Osaka, we played 45 minutes. Traders of Osaka, we played in 45 minutes. The first time we played before the win, it was like 2 hours.
Yeah, fair point.
So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because I think we've covered just about everything. The only thing I will mention is the pain points I felt with the money. We didn't talk about it that much, but it is really easy to get strapped on money.
Yep.
And
storage is expensive.
And then when you pick up a shipping card, other people are often strapped for money too, and then they're going to bid for it. So when you think you're going to get 10 guilders from your storage cards, somebody bids for it and it cuts in half. And then talking about the game being a slog, that just made your efforts to do whatever you're going to do the next turn take a whole other turn.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Because you just don't get your money. So anyway, for me, I'm going to give it a 3 because I don't think I would be super excited about playing it again, but I can see other people would like it. But,
interesting. Yeah.
It's fascinating the differences that we have on these games. Yeah, I respect both of those numbers. Chris, I think most of what you said, you're saving me time because I don't have to say the same things. Bill and Chris, I agree with you. The pace of it can feel a little slow at times. But for me, it didn't bother me. I think that the uniqueness and the room for shenanigans in that trading mechanic outweighed anything else for me in this game. And I found that to be super clever and super interesting to dive into. So I would solidly give this a 4 for me.
Yeah.
With the same reservations, I think. This game isn't going to be for everybody.
No way.
Yeah, I have nobody in my life that would want to play this game.
Yeah. And as I think about it too, I'm like, well, would the average person that I'm playing games with, not you nerds, would they want to play this game? And the answer is probably no, because some of that nuanced trading mechanic stuff that I find fascinating is maybe not going to appeal in the same way to everybody else. They're just going to see it as a boring shipping game, and they're going to be like, this is boring. This is just apples and cloth and boats. But for me, I found it really interesting. I solidly give it a 4. Was close to leaning into 5.
Me too.
Because that trading mechanic is so strong, in my opinion. But yeah, I feel like we have to review these games on a broader spectrum than my specific personal opinion. So, me personally, between a 4 and a 5.
Yeah.
As a recommendation, 4.
3 maybe. I can't think of many people that I would recommend this game to, honestly. A few. You have to know your people.
Yeah, that's true in any case, right? With any game. But
yeah, I loved it though.
As much as I touted Phoenicia, I'm not sure I would recommend it to anyone, right?
No. Hot garbage.
It's worth exploring because it's an auction mechanic. And I think that's what I said in the episode.
You did.
All right. Where can we find Before the Wind?
Yeah. So, interestingly, this game is available on Noble Knight as well, but only the German version, which really shouldn't be a stumbling block because the game is very language independent. and you're probably not going to use the rulebook anyways. You're probably going to go on BGG and download the updated rulebook and the files or something like that. So
that's true. You probably should say that all the cards have pictures on it and there's no words on it.
Yeah.
So
it's totally language independent. So you can get it on Noble Knight for $18. Not bad at all, and there are also 25 copies on BGG if you would rather have English language. Pretty available.
All right. Well, those are our thoughts on Before the Wind.
At the beginning of the 16th century, the city of Rouen is the main French port. The city's wealth is dependent on fishing and trading salted fish. Salt produced in the mines has to be loaded onto ships and used to preserve herring and cod fished in the Atlantic Ocean. Every week, ships full of salt barrels leave Rouen for the fishing grounds of the Atlantic Ocean, and once back, the goods are sold in the city markets. The players represent city merchants. They invest in ships and city buildings to try to get rich. Who will be the richest merchant of Rouen when Francis I, King of France, comes to visit the city?
Upon a Salty Ocean. Published in 2011 by Guild and Rio Grande Games. At the time of this recording, its BGG ranking is 4,119. Designer of this game is Marco Pranzo. He has a couple of other more notable designs, a couple of gem-ish games that we might review at some point. Historia and Dawn of Mankind, if you're familiar with those. I heard about this game from one of our guild members. I knew nothing about this game, actually, but it was recommended to me by somebody who has been with us pretty much from the beginning as well, a really big supporter of the podcast, particularly on Instagram. This is Billy Mustache, or he likes to be called Billy Moustache, I think. So, Billy, this one is for you. It's about time we got to one of your recommendations, so I'm glad we finally were able to do this one. All right, brief rules summary for Upon a Salty Ocean. In Upon a Salty Ocean, In Upon a Salty Ocean, the players are hauling barrels of salt out onto the high seas in an attempt to acquire cod and or herring to sell in port at the best prices to obtain money, which is victory points. So it's important to understand right away, money is victory points in this game. The game takes place over 5 rounds, and at the start of each round, the values of cod, herring, and salt will move up or down based on the instructions of a randomly chosen event tile. Once the market is set, players will then begin taking turns performing actions. Players can perform 8 different actions on their turn, with the actions grouped into 4 different groups of 2. Okay, so that's 4 groups of actions, 2 actions apiece. So there are 2 different city actions, 2 harbor actions, 2 navigation actions, and 2 market actions. This is an important distinction because each group of actions is tied to an action table. This is probably the most important thing to understand from this rules description. At the beginning of each round, all of the action classes, remember there are 4 different classes of actions, 2 actions per class, are set to a price of 0. However, once a player performs a type of action, the cost to do an action in that action class bumps up a step. So now a player doing that same type of action in the future will have to pay 1 more coin to do it. As I mentioned, all actions start at 0, so they're free, but can move as high as 10 coins per action depending on how many times the action is performed by the players. And remember, money is points. Now let's talk about the different types of actions. First are the 2 city actions, buying saline or salt, or buying a building. Buying saline allows you to increase your salt production each round, which you need for fishing. When you buy a building, you place one of your cubes on one of the 13 different kinds of buildings on the game board and receive its benefits. And these do all different kinds of things that I'm not going to go into, but basically they give you different perks like discounts on boat building or in-game scoring benefits, lots of different things that they do.
13 different.
13 different actions. No player aid, I might add. I'll just throw that in there. The next set of actions are the harbor actions. Building a ship and moving goods. Shipbuilding allows you to build up to 2 more ships to move goods, while the moving goods action allows you to transfer salt and fish between your depot, which is your warehouse, and the holds in your ship. The third set of actions are pretty simple. They're the navigation actions. First, you can travel from the harbor to the open sea to fish. When you do this, all of your boats carrying salt will be replaced with cod or herring, your choice. It should be noted that the event tiles can occasionally cause poor weather, pirates, or bad fishing to be in play, and that can affect how much fish you can acquire with this action. The second navigation action is simply to return to the harbor so that you can sell at market. The final set of actions are the market actions. So as I mentioned, you can sell all of your fish in your boats and depot at the current market price to score money, which is points. For every 1 to 8 fish that you sell, the market price will decrease by 1 step, making it less lucrative for other players in the future. You can also buy goods from the market if their values are very low, in hopes that you can sell them for a larger profit later. Once the 5 rounds are complete, the players will take their value in coins and add to that the additional coins that their different owned buildings grant. Remember, a lot of these buildings will give you points for achieving certain things, with most coins winning the game. And that's very generally how you play upon a salty ocean. I left a lot out there with buildings, but
you did better on that one. You made that description much shorter than the last one. So good job, Chris.
This joke's going to have to die at some point. All right, let's get into this thing. So, for me, I thought one of the most interesting things about this game was that action selection track that I alluded to. So, as the players do the same type of action over and over again, that action becomes more expensive in that round. So, when you move to the next round, everything resets to 0. But as more and more people do it, it gets more and more expensive. And again, just to reiterate, expense is not trivial because every coin you spend is a point you're losing. Money is points, okay? So you're constantly having to weigh at what point does this action become too expensive where I'm actually not benefiting from this action. I might actually be hurting myself. I'm paying more than what it actually is worth in the end of the game, right? So you're kind of constantly doing that calculation. What did you guys think about it?
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting. There are other games that do this.
Yes.
But I found how it divided it into 4 separate tracks that were thematic, kind of like Before the Wind a little bit, right?
Yep.
With the different action card stacks. I found it to be pretty interesting. It does tie into a con that I have that I'll come back to later to not add more confusion at this stage. But in terms of the core mechanic itself, I found it to be pretty interesting because you're always weighing, oh man, I really want to do this action again this round, but is it worth it?
Is it worth it?
Yeah.
And at the beginning of the game, that calculation can be really hard to figure out.
Yep.
I think. What do you think, Bill?
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting weighing the market to that track and the value in each one of the buildings. I guess that's the math you have to do in your head because and the
If
first
you can.
Yeah, if you can. Because
Funny that you mentioned math, Bill.
We're getting to that. Just hold on.
Right. I'm sure that's coming. But I will say it was fascinating in the games to see in these 13 buildings, some of these buildings, there's value in getting to them first.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's a real strong incentive on those tracks to do a build portion.
Yep.
In the first rounds, that track goes up pretty quick. It gets hammered. It goes up really quickly because people are racing to those buildings that you think is going to pay off further down the track. So I did think it was a very interesting decision, and it would be more interesting to see with more plays if people abandon that build track earlier.
That's what I was getting ready to go into. Yeah, but keep going.
Yeah. Would the optimal thing to do to say, I'm going to forego that building that looks really good right now to send my ships out to the sea or something like that?
I think it is. I think there's an interesting decision there of when do I pivot and let my opponents grab these buildings, which, yes, I, of course, want them, but they're paying now 7, 8 coins or points to get them. And maybe I just jump on navigation for free, which I need to do at some point anyways, right? Or maybe I come back and sell for free or for a coin, right? So I'm doing things that everybody else is going to have to do eventually at a much cheaper rate. Now, having said that, I say it hesitantly because the buildings are super strong, right? And so I think, again, that's where that calculation of trying to figure out how much is too much is exceedingly difficult in the early rounds of this game, if not impossible. I think this is a gut game in the first few rounds. And I'm telegraphing what we're going to be getting into later. But I think in the first few rounds, it is very hard to know what is the best play, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I like that, personally.
Right. So it's funny because I did the math afterwards, trying to moneyball what you need to get on a per turn kind of basis, because I was thinking these tracks are all numbered from 0 to 10, right? And there's 4 of them, and a winning score is around 150. right? And so if you say with 4 players or whatever, it turns out to be somewhere around 3 points per turn.
Yeah.
And so whenever you're placing your piece, you can pretend to do that math, but there's so much back and forth.
But see, you can't even do that because I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but I guess we have to mention it because I think this is an interesting point before we get into cons. So there's one building, Notre Dame,
Right.
that you can keep placing cubes on it and you can just score more and more and more points, as high as 70, right? Most jumps on Notre Dame, placing another cube, you'll get 15 points instead of 10 points. So you made a 5-point increase. But I paid $8 to do that action. So actually that was a bad move. But was it? Because if you're staying ahead of everybody else,
your next move is going to be worth even more.
Exactly. And that's where the calculation becomes too hard for me, right? And I don't think you can math it out. I think you kind of just have to go with your feeling, right? And again, I don't think this is a bad thing. I like it. I like trying to figure it out, but I think it's challenging. I don't think you can just look at an action and be like, that action gets me 3 points, this gets me 4 points, because the ripple effect of early rounds with the buildings.
Absolutely. I guess what I'm trying to do is put tools in my tool belt to help me think, because you're right. I think it is so hard to fuzzy logic,
yes,
all these things things together. But if you have at least a value thinking, I need over the course of the game, this action that I'm doing here is a net positive, I guess.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the buildings,
yeah,
right, and their benefits. Considering this game is primarily about fishing, right? What were your guys' thoughts on the fishing aspect of the game? I will say up front, I think it can be super lucrative if you do it correctly. But it can also be super anti-lucrative if you do it in the wrong situation, right? Because it requires so many actions to get out and back. You have to build your ships. You have to send your ships out. You have to bring your ships back.
Yeah.
Well, you have to buy your salt.
You have to buy salt.
You have to load the salt into your ships, and then you send them out.
And then you potentially have to unload the fish into your warehouse if you're trying to long ball it.
Yeah.
And then you have to actually sell stuff, right? So it's between 4 and 7 actions, right, to be able to get a ship out and back. So what were you guys' thoughts on the shipping aspect?
Yeah, I agree. It was tough to figure out. I definitely get what you're getting at here, and I think I agree with you. I think early in the game, getting on those buildings just seems to be the right thing to do. It seems to be the right play, and then you just get to shipping later. And I think also one of the things we were doing, for whatever reason, just randomly, salt got really highly valued early. Salt pegged out, actually. And so I was like, screw this. I'm not going through all this fishing because of what Jason was saying, how many steps it was. I'm just going to sell my salt and make money and keep hitting these buildings, right? I get what you're saying. I think fishing can seem arduous when you see all these other buildings. It's like, drop a cube here and you get 6 points at the end of the game. It just seems easier and maybe even a little bit more lucrative. But there's a lot of fuzzy logic there, I think, for sure.
What's interesting, though, and maybe this is moving into cons, is that...
Go for it. I think we should.
Is that for as much fuzzy logic as there is in this game, I think that you can fuzzy logic out the relative values and benefits of buildings.
I don't think so.
Well, yeah, I'm interested to hear
that. Would be very hard, I think.
I think that because you can average out cost of actions, right? For example, I think the buildings, whatever they're called, the shipyard buildings, by far the most valuable building in the game. If you can get a cube on both of those buildings, so there are 2 shipyards, if you manage to get a cube in both of them, you would essentially be able to build your 2nd and 3rd ship for free. If you can do that, which you did in one of our games, it's guaranteed worth about $30, including what you paid to do it and everything else, right? Versus another building, which is worth a max of 10 to 12 points. And so I was going through each of these buildings thinking, okay, well, it would cost me X number of actions to take the building. How much am I going to benefit from it based on circumstances? And I think you can start to figure that out.
I don't think you can, though. So just let me jump in real quick here. And the reason I say that is I agree with you on the ship buildings. I think they are strong. I think ideally, in an ideal world, if everybody understands the game well, everybody puts a cube in there. And then it's a wash at that point.
But then it becomes a moot point, right?
Right.
If everybody knows that.
But that's just 2 of 13 buildings. I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing. I think you're right. I think with the other buildings, I think you are right in that you can kind of figure out those relative values, but it all depends on how much did you pay to place there, right? Yeah, this building might be worth 6, but did I spend 7 to go there? Then it's not worth as much, right? Or did I spend 4? Or did I spend 5 to make sure I at least get 2 points so that Bill doesn't jump on it next round first and get it for 7, right? I think there's more calculation going on here than just this gets me 6 points because of how much you paid when you took the action. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not always one.
I'm starting to fall asleep, though, already.
And I think you're right. It's very spreadsheety, right?
Yeah, this is Spreadsheet the game.
Yes, it is. It definitely is.
/ min-maxing hell. Am I being too blunt about my cons now?
I think you're right. We've talked a lot about math and spreadsheetiness, and I think in the first 1, 2, maybe even 3 rounds, I think the calculations are interesting and challenging and not easy. In the final rounds, especially the last round, this game just has a very anticlimactic end to it.
Min-max
Yes.
hell.
And that's the problem, because in the final round, you don't have to account for future rounds anymore. The calculations now go from being very difficult to being very simple. And actually, people, and this, I'm not holding this against him, it was the right thing to do. We were playing with Garrett. He just got his calculator out. And he was like, well, I'm not going to do this because clearly it doesn't make sense for me to do it. It doesn't score any points, so I'm not going to do it. And everybody just mass it out. And what a crappy way to end a game, right? Yeah. Where everybody's just figuring out what their optimal move is because it's more evident now, and you're just, I really did not like the way this game ended because you can calculate it. Not ideal.
Right.
One more quick thing. I know we're running a little long, but I just have to mention it because I think it all stuck out to us, and I think it would stuck out to other people when they play it as well. Did you all feel like that in our games it seemed like we were kind of racing to the bottom on the victory point track? This bothered me a lot because, as I mentioned, money is points, and in games like this, usually you're trying to be efficient and clever. You're spending your victory points to accomplish things, but you don't want to spend too many because they're your points, right? You're trying to hold on to your points. And it seemed like to me this game incentivized you too heavily to spend all your victory points or your money to take all these actions and do all this stuff because you'll just slingshot back up really violently.
It's like if everybody's spending down, then I might as well spend down too.
Right.
And not only that, but your position on the track determines turn order, and turn order is huge.
That's the biggest thing.
And so everyone was fighting over,
being
I need
last.
to go first. So therefore I need to be lowest on the scoring track.
Exactly.
And by being lowest on the scoring track, I'm taking more actions and getting the jump on these buildings before other people do. So why not? Why not spend down into the negatives when everybody else is spending down into the negatives? And I can be early in turn order on the next round. And I get one additional placement in a building that other people aren't getting.
There was too much incentive to do it, right? And I think at one point, Bill, you were actually at minus 22, as low as you could go. And you planned for that.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It just made sense to do it, right?
Well, another mechanism there is every time you cross over the 0 mark, you lose an extra $1. So I was absolutely planning to stay in the negative because I didn't want to bounce back and forth across the 0.
Which seems weird, right?
Oh, it totally does, yeah.
It put a kind of a bad taste in my mouth. And I think actually, in one of our games, Jason, you passed really early. Mm-hmm. Because
and
you
it
were
hurt me.
And it hurt you.
Hurt
and
me
you looked
extremely
sick because you were sitting there. It started to settle on you. You were like, crap, they're still doing all this stuff and getting all these buildings. And maybe I saved 15 points, but I'm getting behind.
Yeah.
Right?
It was game over at that point.
Right.
You had like 4 more placements on buildings than me.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, it doesn't matter at this point because now I'm down 4 benefits that everyone else is receiving, or at least that you were receiving.
I'm going to make up that 20 points easy. Mm-hmm. Right?
Which I think will trickle into my final con.
Okay.
I know we're harping on it a lot, but the early game is very unforgiving.
Yes.
I feel like.
Yes.
This game reminded me of games like Food Chain Magnate. Where your very first choices in the game, what building you place on first, or what card you take in Food Chain Magnate, determines the trajectory of your entire game. And if you screw that up,
you're dead.
It's done. Right? I called it in one of our games, and granted, this was the first time we played, so we were learning. But I called it in that game. After the second or third move of the first round, I was like, it's game over. Like, Chris has won this game, and I have no chance of winning. And that is exactly what happened because of exactly what you just said. I passed early. I missed out on all those placements. You got a bunch of ridiculously good placements, 2 on the shipyards, and it was done. We were done at that point, right? And then I'm just there for another hour and a half.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
It's funny, I felt that way about Phoenicia and not getting production at the beginning.
Right.
Yeah, so it's like it's a game over for me. So, yeah.
Similar feels. All right. We talked for a while. Got to wrap it up here.
Yep.
Kind of feel like Jason's got to go last, even though he's gone last.
Go last.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll start.
Okay.
No, well, Go ahead. You started last time, didn't you?
Whatever.
Go ahead. You go. You start.
I'll go ahead. I don't have anything mind-blowing to say here. So yeah, this one was sad. I thought I was going to enjoy this one more than I did, unfortunately. I do think it does some interesting things early. I like the action track and the pricing and figuring out when an action is worth it. In the early game, I felt like that was a challenging puzzle, which I enjoyed, and I thought there were some good things going on there. Unfortunately, for the things that we've already mentioned, specifically the anticlimactic ending with the mathiness, I hated that, and the racing to the bottom. I love it when games use points as money. I love that, like Medici.
To create tension.
Yeah. There is no tension when everybody's racing to the bottom.
Because it makes the most sense.
Because it makes the most sense, right? I just was saddened by that. So for me, I'm going to give it a 3. I'm not going to give it a 2. I didn't think it was horrible. Like I said, I liked parts of it, but it missed the mark for me, unfortunately. So I'm going to go with 3.
All right. I guess I'll go next. So this is a complication in breadth, like I alluded to before, when you have so many different buildings that you've got to keep in your head at once about where the value is. Victory points usually reflect is somebody winning the game or not, and there's no correlation there. You have to look at the board, you have to look at the buildings, you have to see where their investments are and try to make a guess about how that's going to play out towards the end of the game, which I thought was kind of interesting. I think that you can have a spectrum of strategies that manifest differently than what we saw. So I'm going to give it a 4.
Oh, wow.
Even though on paper, I don't think I like games like this that are this complicated where you have to know a whole bunch of things. But I thought this one was kind of cool.
Cool. All right. All right, Jason.
Yeah, I know everybody's waiting for my salty opinion on this salty game.
On a salty ocean.
I feel like I've already voiced most of what I had to say about it, but it wasn't a small number of things, unfortunately. I think the unforgiving nature of the start game here, that always rubs me the wrong way a little bit. I don't hate Food Chain Magnate, but it's not one of my favorite games for that exact reason of, man, you can just get hosed really early on, and it just leaves a sour taste in my mouth. But even more so than that, I think just the min-maxing that goes on in this game, the spreadsheet nature of it, and just the fact that it felt like I was starting to hone in on things that were must-dos and things that were not worth doing. When that happens, that means that there's a strategy that is dominant and that I would settle into, and Chris, you've talked about this before, right? I think that I would settle into a pattern of, well, this is what I'm going to do every game. And that there's minimal variability to change or to deviate me off of that path. Yeah, herring might be worth 1 less this round than it was the other round. Or yeah, there might be pirates, so maybe I'll jump on this one other building over here to protect myself from pirates, right? And maybe in the long run, that affects the end game because I spent $2 extra, right? But a game where the end game is going to be decided by me having spent $2 more to do this action now versus some other action, it doesn't excite me, right? That action selection mechanism is cool. The fact that you have to weigh, is it valuable? Is it worth enough to do this anymore? But when I'm racing to the bottom, sure, it's worth it.
Yeah. I
might as well just spend the $10 to do this action again. And maybe we're playing that entirely wrong. And
maybe.
I'm willing to be wrong on that.
I'd love to see somebody make it work. And there are a couple of buildings that seem to suggest that maybe there's some incentive to try and doing that with the banks. But dang, man, if that's not hard. Because you're just giving up so much action potential to try to be frugal like that. But yeah, it's very challenging, I think.
Right. Yeah, so I'm going to give this game a 2.
Yeah.
I was between a 2 and a 3. I don't think it's a broken game. No. I think it's a game that certain people will enjoy a lot.
Yeah.
Right? Because that min-maxing game and that trying to eke every little dollar out of every action that you do, that'll appeal to some people. For me personally, wasn't for me. So I settled on 2.
Fair.
Don't love herring or cod either, so that didn't help.
All right, well, like Jason said, this game some people enjoy. Billy, whose opinion I value highly, and he knows a lot about games, really enjoys this game. So I know there's some people that do. Just missed the mark for a couple of us. Bill enjoyed it, so it might be worth a try. There are several copies on Noble Knight, so you can get it there pretty easily. 13 copies on BGG. So if you're into shipping games, this one might be worth a try. It's interesting to explore. All right. Shipping.
Boring shipping things.
Ships and stuff.
Ships and stuff. Ships and salt.
Fun times.
And those are our thoughts for Upon a Salty Ocean.
Well, thank you guys for joining us for this episode of Hidden Gems. If you like what we're doing here, please remember that it's a huge help to us to give us a rating, a review, on your podcast platform of choice, or to follow us on one of our many social media platforms. Check out the BGG Guild if you want to interact with us or share a game that you feel is a hidden gem. And if you're so inclined, please consider supporting the show over on our Patreon at patreon.com/hiddengemspodcast. Till next time, I'm your host, Jason.
This is Chris.
This is Bill.
Thanks for listening.
This episode of Hidden Gems, number 28, was recorded in Raleigh, North Carolina on March 6, 2022. Join us again in 2 weeks to see me put my fanboy hat on as we review a trio of games that received notoriously bad reviews from famed board game reviewer Tom Bassel. Was Tom right? Tune in to find out. Hidden Gems is produced and edited by Chris Alley, Cameron Lockey, and Jason Yanchuleff. Our Board Game Geek Guild is monitored and managed by honorary Hidden Gems team member Ghidorah. Our show's logo was illustrated by designer and artist Caitlin Nieto. Check out her work on Instagram at It's Caitlin Nieto. We would love to hear from you. Feel free to join the discussion on our many social media accounts. You can find us on Facebook at Hidden Gems Board Game Podcast, Instagram at hiddengems.podcast, and Twitter at Hidden Gems Board. Disagree with one of our reviews? Have something you want to say about one of the games we discussed today? You can also make your voice heard on our Board Game Geek Guild at BoardGameGeek.com, Guild number 3874. Once again, thank you for joining us on Hidden Gems, and until next time, fellow gem seekers, enjoy your games and enjoy your search.
Ready when you are, birthday boy.
Ancient birthday boy.
Always with the he's not
Speak
so.
a little louder.
What?
Hey,
Yeah?
hey, Chris.
Yeah. All right, here we go.